Hi everyone, my name is Emma. Earlier this week I shared a photo that I created as part of the 365-day project where I collaged together in Photoshop a painting that I did with a photo that I took, and all of that was done in Photoshop. And I think that if you've got some art supplies laying around and you've used Photoshop or some other photo editing software enough to be kind of familiar with the layers panel in that software, I think it's a pretty easy thing to at least kind of try out and experiment with yourself. So I figured I would share how I did it, and hopefully it'll inspire you in some way. Okay, so in terms of supplies you'll need, the first thing is paint. These are just really cheap, like $1 acrylic paint tubes from Michael's. With this particular technique, there's no need for it to be archival, so cheap paint is just as good as anything else in this case. In fact, I wouldn't use fancy paints if I had them for this application. The next thing you'll need are some kind of tool that just allows you to spread paint across paper, which sounds really basic, and that is as simple as this painting technique is, as you'll see. So there's a whole bunch of things that you could use to achieve this. This 2-inch brush right here, these are like really inexpensive ones at hardware stores and art supply stores. The cool thing about something like this is that, you know, the bristles are kind of spread out. So like when you use these, it creates like a really nice textured painting. So it's a nice option if that sounds interesting to you. For someone like me who's an art school grad, the tool that you would reach for that is like purpose built for this particular type of application would be a palette knife. So this is a super cheap version of a palette knife, really inexpensive, again, from Michael's. That's my local art and craft supply store. In the spirit of fun experimentation, I will also demonstrate the technique with, and I've actually never used these before, so I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just as excited to see it as you will be, hopefully. So this is just a plastic takeout knife. I assume that many of us in the pandemic maybe getting a lot of takeout and getting a lot of plastic knives. So I will give that a shot. Other things that you could potentially use, a strip of cardboard from a box would be probably the absolute cheapest way to achieve this effect. And as I say that, I think I might try that at some point just to kind of see what happens. So you will also need some type of paper. With these particular paintings, I'm not creating these to hang them on a wall. Like, I'm really just creating these to scan and create digital art with. So I don't want to paint on canvas in this case because that would be really expensive. So I paint on the thickest paper that still feels cheap to me. That's how I make a decision on paper. So this is a mixed media paper, which is, it specifically says it's meant for wet and dry media, which is great in this case, and it's 184 pounds, just to give you an idea of how thick it is if you actually go shopping for paper. The disadvantage to using thinner paper is that the acrylic paint will cause the paper to buckle. Sometimes it buckles so much that it requires a lot of editing in Photoshop later on to kind of get the shadows from the buckling out of it. So that's why, I mean, my paintings still buckle. So like this one, as you can kind of see, is a little bit, you know, it's still a little bit funky, but my scanner can flatten it out well enough that I'm happy with it. And moving on to technology, I do use a scanner. Part of the reason I like the scanner is that you put it on the bed, you put the top on, and it kind of flattens out the funkiness happening here. That having been said, you don't need a scanner. You could flatten these out under a brick or a photo or some books for a couple of days, and then take a photo of this and then get it onto the computer that way. That would work just as well. In terms of editing software, I'm a graphic designer by trade, so I have access to the latest and greatest version of Photoshop. You totally don't need the latest and greatest version of Photoshop to achieve this. Legacy versions of Photoshop, and I mean like probably the versions of Photoshop that you can get for free, definitely still have the tools that I'm going to use today. And a lot of other editing software will have the tools that I'm going to use. Really all you need to be able to create layers in the software, and you need to have access to blending modes in the software. And I'm fairly confident that I that Photoshop does not have a monopoly on blending modes, and many other softwares out there have that. So that's really kind of all you need in terms of the special effects in Photoshop. The last thing you will need, of course, are photos. So what I'm finding that I'm really enjoying with photos are photos taken with my telephoto lens that are both black and white and very high contrast. And the black and white and high contrast are things that I achieve in Photoshop too. Part of the reason I like that is it creates a photo that feels very flat, and that almost feels like it could have been drawn or painted. And I feel like that combines very well with the paintings. That having been said, this type of technique, you could truly like experiment with almost any type of photo and just see what happens and like really, I don't know, kind of revel in the experimentation as I often do. It's the cool thing about using color photos in particular is that you take a painting which, you know, this has color on it, and when you layer that over a photo that has color with blending modes, unexpected things tend to happen in that combination. So I still highly recommend using color photos. Black and white is by no means necessary. And yeah, that about wraps up what you'll need. So to demonstrate the actual painting technique, I'm going to show how to use the palette knife, and I'm gonna just try out, never used this before, I'm gonna try out the little takeout knife. I'll also show you some paintings that I did with the brush, just for the sake of time. I won't actually demonstrate that. But basically all you do, I've cut up that larger piece of paper into smaller strips just to be even a little bit more economical. And then I'm gonna take my paint, and really there's no, you can do a lot of experimentation here, that's all I'll say. Once you've seen me do it, you'll see where, you know, the possibilities are kind of endless. This is also not really a painting technique where you can control what happens a whole lot. You can pick the paint colors and you can kind of pick where they go, and you can kind of try dragging the knife in certain patterns. But in terms of like what you actually get, that's it's definitely a little bit out of my control, and that's part of why I enjoy it. It's kind of fun to see what results from, you know, just the stroke of a palette knife. So I'm just laying out a couple of kind of blobs of paint on the paper. I'm kind of conservative with my paint anyway, for no particular reason other than to save money. But you know, I would caution you against doing too much in terms of like little blobs of paint, because that would cause the paper to buckle a little bit more, which might be a little bit of a pain in the editing side of things. But really all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this palette knife and I'm just going to drag it across the paper and see what happens. So I'm just going to go straight across. I like to try to keep kind of a light hand. I might do, just feeling a little bit of a tiny bit of a wave there. So one thing you can do too is especially once you've done it the one time, you kind of put the knife back in about the same spot. You can drag over it a second time, see what happens there. So I added a little bit more to the bottom there. Let me see if I can pick up some of the a little bit more of the peach there. But yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that. So yeah, like the palette knife, I think there's a little bit of plastic or something on there from some dried up paint that I think is creating some little extra texture here, but I kind of like that. So yeah, that I will say once you've used the palette knife, it's good to immediately clean it off, get all the paint off there, just in case, especially if you're switching colors, so you don't have any unintentional mixing. But yeah, there we go. We'll call that one done and then move on to another one. So let's see, let's pick some new paint colors. I'm gonna do some like pastels. They're just the first three that I see here. One thing I didn't mention is you want to make sure, especially with these tubes, that you're shaking out the tube before you're putting the paint down. One thing that's kind of fun to do in terms of just experimenting with putting the paint down. Let's see. Is to kind of put a little, oh, I got some fun shadows here. I went from having a nice shade to direct sun. I was putting some paint down kind of in an unexpected spot. I'll just do 2, why not? See what happens. And I've accidentally made a little extra paint mark there, that's fine. Okay, so let's give this little knife a shot. I'm gonna move these out of the way so you can see it better. I have no idea how this is gonna go. I think I'm actually, the paint, I laid my paint out a little bit too wide. I'm gonna have to go back over it a second time. Ooh, there we go. That's kind of fun right there. I like that a lot. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to run it over that purple. Now that I've got a clean knife, add some purple back in. Ooh, that's cool. I like that a lot. There you go. The kind of cool thing that you would expect to happen a little bit with this, because the knife has the serrated edge, there's a little bit of, you can see a little bit of the texture there from the knife, so that's kind of fun. So yeah, that wraps up kind of the palette knife and experimental tool side of things. So you can, like I said, you can use a brush. This particular brush is a little bit cheaper and the bristles are a little bit farther apart. So what that kind of tends to do, like here I just created kind of a little wavy motion. Oops, a little bristle there. This is already dry, obviously, but you can see it kind of creates some like kind of cool stripes, and it's a little bit more heavily textured than some of these other paintings. So that is the painting side of things. So we are in Photoshop now, and before I start diving into specific Photoshop things, I wanted to quickly say that prior to this, I scanned in all of the paintings that you saw me do earlier today, and I scanned them in at 600 DPI, and I wanted to specifically mention that because scanning in at 600 DPI allows you to create a really, really high resolution scan that gives you the flexibility to do a little bit more explorations with the painting themselves. Essentially, you create, it's a super high resolution image that allows you to kind of really zoom in on the painting as you're working with it. So if you have access to a scanner and you are scanning things and you can really dial in on the settings, I recommend 600 DPI as opposed to the standard 300 DPI, just to give you a little bit more flexibility. But again, there's nothing wrong with taking a photograph of the painting or scanning in at the standard 300 DPI. So now that we're in Photoshop, you're looking at a piece that I've already kind of created and gotten it to a point that I'm really happy with, just to kind of get a lot of the exploration and like going through dead end stuff kind of done off camera, so that I'm not spending like a half hour kind of talking and, you know, having to like, you know, have long moments of silence as I'm like really actively thinking about what I like. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take us back to the original photo, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps and kind of what my thought process is in brief. So I'm over here on my layers panel, and I'm going to take away all the work I did and bring us back to the original photo. So this is a pretty simple photo. This is shot with my Lens Baby Trio, actually, which I really love. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in on a separate layer one of the scanned paintings. So to do that, I'm going to do place. You can do embedded or linked. I kind of tend to choose embedded just in case just in case I move the original file, basically. You could also copy and paste in the painting on another layer. That particular part of this is not, again, it's not super critical one way or another. Part of the reason I like placing is it just, I don't know, basically it maintains the original resolution of the image as you're resizing it. So that's definitely one advantage of doing it that way. So now that I have it placed, so when you place things, it automatically puts you in free transform mode, which is this mode where you're seeing this like X and like these little, the little boxes along the side. So what I'm going to do is right away just start moving things around, kind of seeing what I might like. Let me see, trying to remember what I had before. So again, one of the advantages of doing the 600 DPI is that you can really like go super big. And so to get out of free transform, you accept the changes. You can either hit the little check mark here, or I'm pretty sure you can enter on the keyboard. I'm just accustomed to hitting the button. But you can see that that's like really nice high resolution still, even stretched out and kind of probably larger than it would be even in real life. So now that we've gotten to this point, one thing I wanted to demonstrate, especially with this piece, is that one thing I would normally do here, and I'm very comfortable and adept at doing this, is I would remove the white. I would actually do kind of a cutout and just kind of take away all the white so that I've kind of got more options with working with the painting. But I wanted to show you kind of one way that you can get around that. There's a certain group of blending modes that kind of automatically take the white away, so that you don't even need the technical knowledge of like, what are the different ways that you could, quickly cut this white out. Although there are lots of like cool tips and tricks. So again, we're over here in the layers panel, and I've got my painting layer selected. And the blending modes are up here in this little drop down that says normal. I think if you hover over it, it'll actually, it says set the blending mode for the layer. So what you're doing is you're applying a blending mode to this layer, which will then kind of interact with the layer below it. I've got this, my finished piece here is an invisible layer, so it won't be impacted, but it will impact my background layer in the photo layer there. So the cool thing, this second chunk of options are all options that make the lighter parts of an image transparent. And they do that in different ways, as you can see here. And it's just a really cool way to like get rid of the white really fast. So most of the time it's usually where I start, just to kind of see if I like it enough to not have to do the cutouts. But if you go beyond that with the blending modes, if you go into this next block, the lighten through lighter color, that will create a situation where you might actually really like the way that it's kind of framing the photo here with the white, and maybe you choose to actually fill in the white in the corners here. Like that would be a really great option to avoid, again, having to like do the cutout. But if, say, I really liked this, but I really wanted the rest of the photo to show through and I didn't want the white, I would at that point figure out a way to cut the white out from the photo. The fourth block of blending modes here, again, just create different effects that are really fun options. Some of them are really extreme, like this hard mix creates like a really graphical result, and it varies every time just based on the painting, right? Like it's kind of picking up some of the pink from the painting, and some of the aqua has just like gone to it in absolute extreme, but that's an option there. And there's even more options than what I'm showing you, but just to kind of give you an idea of all the possibilities and options. I settled on, I believe it was color burn before, so we're going to do that again. I just kind of liked the ways that it was kind of emphasizing this part of the photo, and it was bringing a little bit of color out. I really liked that. So one thing that is happening here, even though the lighter parts of the image are being taken away, I've kind of got a little bit, you can see the edges of the original scan there. One thing I'm going to do very quickly, and if you have any questions, you can ask me, but because I kind of like to do things in a non-destructive way in Photoshop, I'm going to use a layer mask to really quickly kind of erase those edges. Let's see. And I am going to kind of blaze through this really fast. So again, if you have any questions about this, just let me know. But the layer mask will allow me to kind of erase away some of the edges here and get that looking a little bit nicer and cleaner for me. Let me see where they all are. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is that even though I've applied that layer mask, I can still make other adjustments. So I do want to make this a little bit larger, maybe even rotate it to kind of really flow. Because the thing that I'm looking at is I'm really liking how it's kind of flowing with the power lines, and it's emphasizing kind of, to me, the focal point of it's kind of adding more interest to kind of what I was already seeing as the focal point here with the towers. So I'm going to accept that change. And again, to go back into the free transform, I'm on a Mac, but I just use Command T. And again, you have to have the correct layer selected to do that. Okay, so now if I wanted to, I could stop here and call it a day, and really it could be as simple as that. What I'm going to do, just to kind of go the extra mile, and again, everything from here on out is really optional, is I'm going to apply just an extra effect to really unite this photo in terms of color. So one thing that I noticed right away that I really liked is I kind of liked this like the little bits of that like teal aqua that were coming out, and I was like, I kind of think I'd like a way to kind of make the whole photo just a little bit more green tinged, to kind of make these corners a little bit more green and kind of like tie it back in with the colors of the painting. So to do that, I'm going to use the Nik Collection, which is technically separate software from Photoshop. That is paid software, but it's not a monthly fee. I think it's a one-time. It's like $80. But I love the color effects, analog, silver effects. Like, these are my absolute favorites. I'm going to go into color effects. And again, like what it's loading up now is technically a separate piece of software from Photoshop. So I apologize about saying that you only need Photoshop at the beginning. This is a cool add-on that's definitely not necessary. And actually, you could achieve this type of effect with presets or in other ways in Photoshop, which I'll show you with the black and white photo in a minute. So what I ended up using, I'm going to kind of go through this super fast because it will be a whole other video to do a tutorial on the Nik Collection. But basically, I used one of the Film Effects Modern Branded, and then I'm going to go into cross-processing, and I'm going to layer on the fun color. And this is the one I landed on. I had it about 50%. So I'm going to hit OK on that. And so what that's, kind of like I said, that's making these corners of the image a little bit more green. And actually, it's making the whole image a little bit more green too. But yeah, that was kind of what I landed on that I really liked. Let me see, zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. And I'm going to see how close I got to my original right now. I'm going to bring that layer back. Oh, a little bit different, but not by too much. So yeah, that's, as I was talking about the color photos earlier, I really felt inspired to try out a color photo today. And I hope that was kind of cool for you guys to see the behind the scenes. I'm going to very quickly talk about the black and white option. So this is another photo from the shoot that I did earlier this week, where I manipulated. It was kind of, I think the other photo was a much more close-up on about this section of the tree with the birds. This is a little bit of a wider shot, but it was still taken with my telephoto lens. I'm going to take away some of my layers here. So what I've already done to prepare this image, if you want to go the black and white flat route, is that in Camera Raw, I've manipulated my raw file to be much more high contrast. It basically ends up kind of being black and white without me having to make it black and white, because it was just such a gray day that the sky was just a very flat gray already. So it's really just a matter of really increasing the contrast and upping the exposure a little bit, and I was basically at this very flat black and white image already. But I mean, obviously you can do different black and white effects to kind of get you to black and white. Obviously a number of ways to do that. So what I did, actually, I did a little bit of experimentation. This is actually the same, as you'll see, this is actually the same painting, just a different interpretation with a totally different photo. And the blending mode that I'm using in this case is the multiply blending mode. You can see that in this case, there's not normally like a huge difference between some of these, just because it's not really interacting with color, it's just interacting with the black and white. So anyway, multiply was the one that I kind of landed on there. And very similar to the color image, this is like really cool, but like I kind of like the idea of taking it just that one step further and trying to figure out a way to kind of make everything feel like it's in kind of one united color family. So one way that you can achieve that in Photoshop are with adjustment layers. And so again, this is the beauty of just kind of being aware of like the different options available to you just in the layers panel and working with layers. So I'm going to turn on my gradient map layer, but to get to the adjustment layers, it's along the bottom of the layers panel, and it's this little circle that's kind of half black, half white. There's a whole range of options that are available here. The gradient map is kind of cool because it will let you kind of add in different colors. And I'll show you. So this is, if you double click on the little circle here, it'll bring up the options for the gradient map. But I'm going to, the other thing that's happening here too is I actually have another blending mode applied to the gradient map layer, which is kind of how it unites the color. So I'm going to put that back on normal. And this is, when you first apply the gradient map, this is what it looks like, right? Which this is kind of cool and abstract, but not really what I was going for. But that just to give you an idea of like, this is what it looks like. And then the blending modes are really what transforms it into something kind of something that just feels a little bit more united in terms of color for me. So again, we got darken, multiply, color burn. The color burn, see, it's totally burning out. It's making the corners white. It almost looks like I didn't apply the gradient map at all. Linear burn, darker color. And again, you could kind of go into some of these other options just to see what happens. Like, I wonder what the hard mix would look like. That's definitely pretty stark. So like, yeah, some of these kind of like really wild things happen when you explore all the options, but I ended up really liking the linear burn here. That kind of set everything. It recolored the painting a little bit in a way that really matched with the kind of added pink in the corners, and I was pretty happy with that. So that about wraps it up. Of course, I think I've been talking for about 15 minutes just on Photoshop stuff, and I hope that I was explaining things enough as I was doing them. If not, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope that I can help. Normally, when I'm teaching people, I'm teaching in person, and I love being able to answer questions, as they come up. And unfortunately, I can't do that here, but happy to answer questions if I can. Thank you for watching.